I just want to welcome our panelists for tonight's discussion. Professor Laurie Medina, Associate Professor of Anthropology and also Director of the Center on Latin American and Caribbean Studies, and Professor Stephen Gasteyer, Associate Professor of Sociology. After our panelists share their initial thoughts, we're going to open the discussion. If you have any questions or comments.
It was really an interesting experience to see the film, and there are so many layers to it. A couple of the things that really stood out for me, I guess, were some of the binaries that the film constructs. The developed countries versus developing or less developed countries, which, as Osvaldo pointed out, are all interchangeable. And sort of the distance between them, the divide between them, the differential power between them. And the other really key divide for me was the indigenous, non-indigenous divide. And one of the things that seemed like an interesting tension throughout the film is that the characters were kind of suspended, actually. So you had, I had the sense that these were binaries. They were opposite and opposed somehow, and yet the characters were suspended between them, and connected intimately to both sides of the binary, whether it was Washington versus Bolivia, or whether it was indigenous versus non-indigenous. So it was that kind of, for me, like the things that were going on in their heads kind of reflected that suspension between two things that are clearly depicted as opposites, and very contentious in the film.
I would pick up on that and actually think about it in terms of this role of information, which was also this sort of binary. So this is top secret, and yet everyone knows that this train is coming down the track from the beginning, right? And we don't know what's in this soil. It's hermetically sealed, and yet everyone seems to know. And yet at the same time, this is the military. We're out in these rural areas that we think of as isolated, and yet the police have to use their phones to get it back in touch with the metropole, right? So that binary also falls to information. And information, what do people know and what don't they know, and what is knowledge and what isn't knowledge, and you play with that all the way through the film. The other part that was interesting to me is, as an environmental justice scholar, how this particular event mirrors so many of the cases that we hear about, right? I mean, some of it's almost an archetype, right? Where it's this notion of, the toxics. Well, the whole point of the toxics is we'll put them somewhere that is meaningless to anyone from it could be South Africa, it could be South America. It really doesn't matter. The whole point is that it's not in the heart of where people are powerful, and yet and yet it is, of course, a place that is sacred and important to people all the way along. And thinking about information, the thing that struck me is one of the mistakes we often make in the academies. We say, well, this is just about knowledge. All we have to do is tell people. And yet, this film shows how people know. They know the danger. And it's not like they need to be conscientized. Often they stand up, right? I mean, I kept thinking back, right? This is the first celebrated case of environmental racism was people of color in North Carolina lying down on roads so that toxic waste wouldn't come into their facility. And yet we saw this then play over and over again through this somewhat bizarre case, right? With all these other things going on in the middle. So,
which is all the more compelling because it's based on real events.
Yeah, exactly.
Back in '94.
Yes.
And it was interesting also, like the resistance, like how the people acted as a collective, as a community, these different rural areas in different parts of the country.
Yeah. Yeah, and there was an organization to the resistance, right?
Yes.
It was there was always someone you had to go to talk to, or someone Mallory Scott had to go to talk to. Right?
And at the end, even in violence, unfortunately, as well, like when you see resistance, there is always going to be some type of violence. And it was also interesting how the cops they became prisoners.
Yeah.
Yeah. How like the change of roles in these areas.
Oh, we need to speak up. Okay.
Another one of those dialectics seemed to be between like responsibility and I think duty is probably one of them, or like orders, I guess. Mm-hmm. Especially like in the beginning, almost like every other line was like, "I'll take responsibility." Mm-hmm. Right. So it seems like that definitely is a pretty big aspect of what the film is trying to say, like the responsibility of who made the toxic waste, what the responsibility of whose responsibility is it to take care of the waste, right? And eventually find out that it's the military.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a pretty interesting thread throughout the whole narrative of the film.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, the whole point of dumping waste is to effectively shirk responsibility, right? It's, we create this stuff that is in some way toxic. Of course, what's the other part that's interesting is its responsibility for what? Everyone knows it's poison, but at a certain point you get the sense that it's way blown out of proportion, right? That no one's quite, it's like you move from, oh, it's perfectly safe, it's hermetically sealed, to, oh my God, if you even come within 50 feet of us, it's going to, right? And so there is this additional, along with responsibility, is this notion of transparency or lack thereof. That's a key component to the film all the way through, right? The story all the way through.
We only see a couple of boxes in the film, but it was actually 400 tons of toxic material.
What do you think? What do you make of those kind of magic characters, the men with the devil masks that appear throughout the film, but especially in that scene when they reach Uyuni, and it's kind of a magic realism scene, because that did not happen in the actual story, so obviously it's a metaphor. But what do you think of that element? What do you do with that?
So for me, it's a metaphor of the importance of the sacred, right? So that it's this notion of there's value to a place because it is sacred, and not even if it's by all other sort of Western colonial definitions, this is a wasteland, right? You're looking out at this place that is effectively a salt flat. There's nothing here, and yet you have this emergence of this army of the indigenous sacred. Right? That's sort of what I took away from it. Yeah. That will resist, right? It's the whole point of those belief systems is a form of resistance to powers, right? At least as it's depicted in the film.
Yeah, and I would emphasize the indigeneity of that sacredness.
Yeah.
I felt like a representation of those who take care of the earth, the mother earth. Like it was a way to represent the earth itself, because they were following the train, even though I don't know how they did it, because they were like always in front of the train, or by the train.
That's the magic part.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're like guardians of the earth, as you were saying. Yeah. Even in the Salar de Uyuni, that is supposed to be a dead place, but still sacred.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about how the train itself, Federico, the role it plays in the movie? Early on, Engler is talking about how I can't remember the line exactly, but something to do with it's an anarchist in the very beginning. You know, how at the end it's the one delivering to the military. Very anarchical. So if you could just touch on that, I'd be interested to hear your take.
Yeah, it's interesting because it plays an important role, right? It's the crankiness of the train really is part of what draws out the story. This is not in fact, it is a machine that's sort of past its prime and doesn't quite obey the rules, right? It's out there and yet there's this bond between Klingler and this machine that is a key part of almost an internal resistance to this project, right? That's there. They are moving. You feel like the machine and Klingler are working together almost to undermine it from the beginning. And having a machine that is sort of old and cranky and not quite up to date probably was necessary to make that work, right?
Well, and named for an anarchist.
Right.
I mean, so that was kind of another binary that struck me, is the binary between order and anarchy that are kind of in tension throughout the film, with the major continually trying to impose order
Right.
on people, things, machines that refuse to be ordered according to his rules, and himself coming to doubt the value of the order that he's been trying to impose.
I was really interested in how the film plays with tropes of the Western, and I thought the train was one clear way of doing that, just putting us kind of in the 19th century. So yeah, I don't know if anybody else wanted to comment on that. I mean, I feel like that first appearance of, even the way the music is used, it feels like spaghetti Western.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to think about what that spaghetti Western feel does to the film, right? Does it, is the intention to really highlight, I mean, the thing about looking at it from the perspective of somebody who thinks about indigenous rights and things like that, the spaghetti Western now looks like this colonial endeavor, right? When I look at it, I'm sure that was not the intention. That was not how the typical American audience viewed it in the 1950s. But looking at it now, I'm sort of thinking about, the colonization and the genocide and so on and so forth. And so I wonder if that's part of the intention, is that it's supposed to bring back sort of how this is just a continuation of that colonial endeavor and those systems of oppression. So there's that undercurrent, political, which may or may not be there. Certainly, it's a way of giving you this sense of open space. Lots of, you're out in territory that is frontier, right? In its sort of colonial depiction, and of course that's where you want to send your toxic waste if you're part of the government. And yet, it doesn't end up like a spaghetti Western.
No, it stops being a Western, right? It's totally something else, right?
Yeah.
Well, and when I think of railroads, I mean, I think of extraction.
Right.
That generally throughout Latin America, railroads were built by companies who needed to ship something out. And so here we have the reverse kind of instead of extracting, we're sending our toxic remains to you. But it was interesting to me also the kind of intricacies of the rail system that are also not widely known. I mean, one guy knows where the lines are, and they're taking these ones that are precisely because they're forgotten, they're unused, people don't know about them. So it's kind of very much a kind of a reverse of the typical sort of use of railroads.
So I had one question, because I know that the theme for your semester is humor. So we tried to find a film that was slightly humorous. Obviously, what we can tell as an audience that sometimes there were jokes that we didn't get.
Right.
Because humor is culturally embodied and it's hard as an outsider to listen to those. So it's a little bit, I think it's a little bit hard to analyze it along those lines, if you don't get the joke sometimes, but I was curious what you both thought, coming from pretty serious ways of thinking about environmental races and indigenous rights and all these sorts of things. What did you make of the choice of the director to approach those subjects through humor?
Each time it was funny, it surprised me. I wasn't expecting it because the themes that it's dealing with are so serious and dark, and then all of a sudden something bizarre or just strange would happen that seemed. It seemed like it was kind of trying to keep us a little off balance. I felt.
At the same time, there's this interesting thing they do, right? It's for about the first half of the movie, there's something humorous in almost all the interactions of the police, right? They're basically Keystone Cops, right? And it's like this diss of the Bolivian police force, right? And then it gets dark in the second half, and it's no longer that funny. And in retrospect, it's not that funny because, you know, the guys died and so on and so forth. But it was for that first half of the movie. I really thought of it as these sort of this sort of humorous satire about the ineptitude of the police. I think it was probably one way of introducing the characters and making it not just this serious thing. But it's an interesting choice, and I don't know if it follows the real story that one of the police officers was killed or whatever, but it's an interesting choice to then turn it, so that by the end of the film, you're not thinking about Keystone Cops when you think about the police, right?
One of the aspects of the film that I think genuinely confused me was the inclusion of the love plot. So I'm just not sure how that meshed very easily with these like overarching plots.
Yeah.
These other overarching plots, which were much more interesting, to me at least. I was just curious what if you guys had any explanations anya to help tie that in. I don't know. That's a hard question, but
I don't have an explanation. Tanya jumped on the train to get away from being a servant.
Yeah,
was what she said, and then essentially became a servant, cooking for people and caring for treating their wounds, and so.
Is it just about the hypocrisy of the situation of the train itself, but in the form of a person, I guess? I don't know.
Well, in 2016, in an interview with the director Julia Vargas, she talks about these how she portrays women in the movies. Talking about Tanya, and she says that, and I quote, that she's a woman who seeks her freedom, and she assumes her role without asking for permission, and she's able to choose her destiny. And then she also says that she identifies with Tanya in some way. Yeah, but I still had a little problems with how she's portrayed, especially that scene, that image of the maternal figure. I didn't know what to do with it.
I don't think she's a servant in the train at all. She chooses to do those things also in a maternal figure, because there is before that Mariscal tries to abuse her, and she rejects him. But the second time, she's kind like it's her choice. It's her choice. So cooking or taking care of the wounds of the wounded, that is something she can do. So she's contributing to the group. It's her choice. I don't see that as when she's in the train. And to me, the inclusion of Tanya in the plot and in the train, as well as the little jokes that were also surprising to me, because I wouldn't expect this kind of film. I think these were ways to kind of not so much break the tension, but break a potential monotony, because it's the journey. I thought I saw the trailer, and I thought that they were actually going to reach to their destination pretty fast, and they were going to open the boxes, and then the history or the conflict was going to start there. What was in the sealed cargo? No, that's what I thought. And no, it's the whole film is about the journey.
Yeah,
the journey of the train and the journey of Mariscal. He's changing. So it's a very interesting personal journey for Mariscal.
Well,
but the inclusion of Tanya, I didn't see her as a servant at all in the train. I mean. Yeah, but that's my view. So
no, it works for me. I mean, I think there is this interesting interplay of her as a female figure, right? And what is her role? The choice to have her and what's his name, the younger guy, run off at the end. You know, I'm not.
That doesn't convince me either. It's too much, but it sounds like a telenovela.
Yeah, right, exactly. Maybe it was just a nod to
So, because there is a super strong social stratification in the Andean countries.
Yeah.
And it's very, how can I say, extraordinary and unusual that such a relationship would flourish and end in marriage, you know.
Yeah.
So that didn't convince me either.
Because she was running away from it, and she didn't get to her. She was going to La Paz, right?
Yeah. Well, because La Paz is
exactly. The
prime destination.
But she stayed like in the limbo, like.
Yeah, she doesn't make it to La Paz.
But she also didn't come back.
Nobody got to their destination.
Nobody
And I found myself being very skeptical throughout that they were actually on their way to Chile to get rid of this stuff.
Yeah,
right. Yeah.